I will go off camera just so you can focus on the content, but I'm really excited to share this with you all. Yeah, so like Steph said, my name is Saskia. I'm a brand strategist at Colle McVoy, and a lot of my job involves doing research to find insights and human truths for creative ad campaigns. And so sorry, that's just, there we go. And so a lot of what I do involves looking into trends in the outdoor industry. I am super passionate about the outdoors in general. So the outdoor industry and looking into audience insights and competitor insights and just trends in the outdoor space is truly my bread and butter. So I'm really excited to share this with you all today. So here's what we'll cover. We've kind of broken it out into 3 different trends that we're seeing. The first one, we'll chat through kind of how the outdoor boom is expected to continue and what that means for us as marketers. The second one, we'll chat through how marketing will affect us in a possible upcoming recession. And then finally chat through more of the need for inclusion and diversity in the outdoor space. So we'll start with the outdoor boom. No surprise to anybody that there was this huge outdoor boom in the last few years, which was really truly life-giving to a lot of us during the pandemic. Often provided the only social and physical activities available at some points, just being able to get outside and try new activities. And we know too that so many people started new outdoor activities, including fishing and boating. But when we look into the future, the good news coming out of this pandemic is that Americans' interest in the outdoors is really here to stay. After the pandemic, over half of people right now say that they're more likely to take an outdoor or nature vacation than they were before the pandemic. This is something I personally can definitely relate to. This photo here is actually of me a couple months ago in Glacier National Park. My dad and I started taking annual trips to the national parks. We started this during the pandemic because there really weren't any other vacations to be able to take, and now we have made it an annual thing. So this was our 3rd annual national park trip every September. So that's just personal anecdote, but really reflects what we're seeing across the board from people just being really interested in the outdoors, even post-pandemic. And 69% of people saying that they truly have this renewed appreciation for the outdoors after the pandemic as well. And so kind of what that means for us, like people are spending time in outdoors, that's really embedded for people in their everyday. But for us, after almost 3 years of growth, the outdoor market truly shows no sign of slowing down, which is really good news for us. So despite what we're hearing of fishing and boating participation rates possibly slowing down, the outdoors market is still really booming when we look at equipment sales. And we're expecting 10% annual revenue growth in the sports and outdoor market from this year to 2025. And that's expected to result in a projected market volume of over 100 billion. So this effect of the pandemic and people getting outdoors is really expected to continue in terms of consumer behavior and what they're buying. And when we look at purchasing behavior, some interesting research that came out at the end of the last year is showing that people are really going online more than ever, but they're also buying quicker more than ever, and they're also buying multiple pieces of equipment. So a few stats that kind of break that down. First, 76% of outdoor recreation participants, they're going online to get information before they buy. Half of them, this was really interesting, that half of them are actually purchasing within 24 and 48 hours of starting their research. So that really emphasizes the need for us as marketers to meet them where they are online, and then also meet them early in their shopping process, because their process is definitely quickened compared to previous years. Nearly 3/4 of them are purchasing multiple products when they're buying products. And then finally, a lot of them are becoming repeat customers. So 74% of repurchasers actually occur within the first 6 months. So that's really interesting for us to think about too, knowing that people who are purchasing outdoor products are much more likely to become repeat customers. So just thinking about how we can capture them right away. So that's some outdoor, just general buying trends. But when we look at boaters specifically, they are really hooked. We know that, though finding a boat during the pandemic was difficult, boaters do overall report being satisfied with the shopping and purchase experience. So that's really good news for us. And the majority of first-time and also repeat boat owners intend to keep boating. So we're seeing good reports from their experience, but also great attitudes towards their behavior going forward. So when we look at this just desire to get immersed in nature, like why is everybody going flooding to the national parks? Why is everybody so reporting this immersed interest in the outdoors? It's really kind of cool where it comes from. It comes from this renewed consumer focus on seeking purpose and connection. And so long we didn't have that, but now we're seeing consumers really seeking out deeper, more meaningful experiences to reconnect with nature and loved ones. And this quote kind of really illustrates why. When you think about time spent with family or friends in the outdoors, there's joy associated with those activities. Those are moments that people have been missing. So that idea of joy is something that has really come through and has started to affect a lot of marketing campaigns post-pandemic. So this idea of joy and connection is something we're really seeing when we look at just different campaigns that have come out as well. So this is a really awesome example of one that came out at the end of last year. It's the More Than a Jacket campaign from North Face. And it's super inspiring. If you haven't watched the 60-second video, I would definitely recommend going to watch that after this. But the idea is that, yes, North Face is selling jackets, but it's more than a jacket. They kind of go through, it's the joy, it's the experience, it's that time with other people. So the whole spot is really focused on those expressions of just joy and happiness and the experiences in the outdoors and what those allow you. And so this is just one really stellar example of that messaging shift that we're starting to see post-pandemic in the outdoors world. And it's also, the last campaign kind of alluded to that too, how people right now and people getting outdoors are just more interested in doing outside activities together. And so brands are starting to capitalize this on a little bit and turning their customers into communities. And so it's a really great way to build strong relationships with loyal customers, around these shared interests. And so this quote kind of illustrates what's happening there too. It kind of talks about how over time, the outdoors had previously turned this individualist thing instead of the communal space that it was in the past. And that's actually changing. And so we're starting to see a messaging shift from this idea of the outdoors as an individual pursuit to a community one, just in the last few years. So kind of reclaiming that idea of getting outdoors together with people. And so here are just a couple brand examples of that as well. And the first one being the Merrill Hiking Club. And so this is a brand, they have selected a bunch of female trailblazers across Canada, and they lead these hikes. And so they meet at a specific place. And so it's really just a great example of a hosted experience from a brand that is really built off of this idea of community. And then the second one on the right, this is actually a British biking brand. And they lead specific bike rides that lead off from their store and from their cafe as part of the store. So it's a really great example of getting customers to come back to your store, since all of those experiences leave from the store, but also a great experience in just getting to be with other people around that shared interest. So wanted to share these two examples of, community-based experiences. And when we look at how big community has really launched in the last couple years in the outdoors, just really interesting to think about as marketers for how can you create an experience that's going to be centered around boating, and how can you bring people back to, maybe where they bought that boat, or create an experience for them to experience that idea of joy and community out on the water with other people. So as we get to this last section here, the biggest takeaway being, as marine marketers, as you think about planning for the next year, what we're seeing in the outdoor space right now is that the marketers that will succeed the most are the ones that incorporate that joy of the outdoors and also that connection with others into marketing campaigns through storytelling. So that is our first section. And like Steph mentioned, we'll pause and stop for questions at the end, but want to pivot now into our second section, which is marketing in a possible upcoming recession. And so why this feels especially relevant is because over 2/3 of economists believe that a recession is likely to hit as soon as next year. And this, when we look at consumer sentiment across the country, this has Americans very worried. 89% of people report being just concerned about either inflation and also related to a possible economic recession. And this is a really high number. We use Harris Poll as a company that we get research from that tracks consumer sentiment week after week. And this number continue to increase week after week. So it's something that just Americans across the board are worried about. And this has the potential to affect their fishing and boating behavior, quite possibly could keeping them off the water a little bit. I know inflation is something that we're probably all feeling across the board, but high fuel prices may reduce equipment sales. We could see participation shrink back to 2019 levels just due to unemployment. And then finally, just the marine category and higher price products like boats could see greater challenges in a recession. So if this, has you a little bit worried or a little bit skeptical, you're definitely not alone. 95% of marketers, are feeling the same way. Most people are expecting to be affected by economic recession, according to some research that just came out about 2023 behavior. So if you're feeling that, you're definitely not alone. And a lot of marketers are wondering, how does this affect ad spend? Should I be pulling back? What should I do there? So we're kind of going to look back a little bit first in order to answer that question. So if history repeats, many brands could react by actually pulling back on marketing spend. So when you look at our most recent recession, so the 28-29 financial crisis, a lot of brands did that. A lot of brands pulled back on their total media ad spending. So you can see here the percent change from 2008 to 2009 decreased 17.5%. And so what did this mean? Well, generally speaking, it proved to be a pretty bad idea. This was a study that was actually reconducted in 2021 and included brands across industries, but saw that the sales impact was just very monumental after ad dollars were turned off. So you can see here the sales change after a brand stopped advertising dropped 16% after 1 year, 58% after 5 years, and 71% after 9 years. And I know 9 years sounds like a lot, but even a 16% sales change after 1 year is still a pretty staggering amount for just 1 year of paused advertising. But this typically is especially a bad idea when we look at history, in a crisis or a recession. So, if you look at that graph in the top right, this is going back to even the 1980s recession. And you can see that brands who either maintained or increased ad spend saw that much stronger recovery. That's that red line there. And also steeper and faster growth after the recession than brands that decrease spend. That green line stays very, very stagnant at that time. And then this graph in the bottom right really echoes this, showing that brands who increased spend had by far the strongest market share gains during the post-session recovery. So kind of the biggest takeaway here is that, brands that maintain or increase spend after a recession not only recover faster, but they also grow a lot faster than brands who decreased ad spend. And that's really good news for us too. When you look at, consumer sentiment and what consumers are expecting from brands, you might guess that, if people are dealing with a lot in a recession, they don't want to hear from brands, but that's actually not the case at all. They actually expect it. So we're seeing that, nearly 60% of consumers actually demand support from brands to get through harder economic times. 87% actually expect to hear from brands just as frequently or more during a period of economic stability. That was something that really shocked me, but makes sense, honestly. And then, almost 60% also agree that brands should help customers through rising prices. So this is the good news for us that consumers actually expect to hear from us, and brands do have a role to play here. So marketers have taken note of this. They've learned from previous mistakes from that last financial crisis and have taken note of that consumer sentiment. And when we look at research expected for next year and what marketers are planning to do, more and more are actually planning to increase spend than even last year across both brand and performance. And then finally, you might be asking yourself, what type of messaging should I show up with during this time? And this quote kind of really illustrates what you should do. So it says, while explicit cost of living messaging might not work for all, brands treading this path should focus on reliable and calm messaging that responds to the emotional state of the audience. And by seeking credible media partners and thinking carefully about context, they can achieve real authenticity crisis. And so that reliable and calm messaging is something that really stands out. And so to end here, this section, I just wanted to show one out of category example. This one is actually from Ally Bank. And so they arguably, have an even stronger role to play to consumers during a financial crisis. But it's just a really beautiful campaign about them positioning themselves as an ally to consumers, saying, we're here for you. And it really shows up messaging wise in that, reliable and calm way, in just a very beautiful creative execution as well. So to end here, our biggest takeaway here is that yes, signs are pointing to an upcoming recession, but maintaining or actually even increasing marketing spend truly does lead to the most success for brands. Now is definitely not the time to decrease spend. And then also, if you are looking to message during this time, some of that calm, reliable messaging to meet consumers in this moment of uncertainty is showing to be the most successful. So that is already our second section. And we're going to jump to now this third section before we pause and take questions. So this last section, we're going to chat through, in 2023, the need and opportunity as well for brands in the outdoor space for inclusion and diversity. So to kind of back up here, individuals have actually been the ones, instead of brands, who have been driving this movement toward increasing representation in the outdoors for many years. It's actually, there are so many groups out there that I didn't even know about before starting to work in the outdoor space, that have really led the charge on this. So you'll see so many groups out there like Brown Folks Fishing or Melanin Base Camp, Unlikely Hikers, that started these groups because they just weren't seeing themselves represented in advertising and marketing and the outdoors. So they said, hey, like, I love the outdoors. I'm not seeing myself out there. I'm going to try and find this group and this community of people that look like me. And so individuals have kind of been leading the charge here for a while, but we are seeing that brands are, finally starting to get involved here. So highlighting just a few really cool brand examples that we've seen in this space. This first one, you can tell that I love North Face because I keep bringing it up, but the North Face a couple years ago launched what they call the Explore Fun Council. And so they have invited experts and diverse perspectives to address inequity and also collaboratively workshop solutions. So it's really them taking this leadership role, saying, hey, this is something that we want to commit to, but also just inviting other people to the table and really working in a collaborative way to address inequity, which is pretty cool. A second example, so Free People is actually a women's clothing company that has an active wear outdoor line, and they partnered with this group called Hike Club and also the National Park Foundation to address the disproportionate representation in national parks. Noticing that the national parks still were fairly white, wanting to bring more representation there. And so they started this Find Your Park program to open up access to people that maybe hadn't felt represented there. And this is something that's really interesting too, to see a clothing company partnering with the National Park Foundation for an issue as big as this. Like, that's something that we never would have seen, even 10, 20 years ago. To see a clothing company have this type of grand scale partnership is pretty cool as well. And then finally, of course, just wanted to highlight some of the work that RBFF has done to welcome people of color into the fishing and boating space. They have been a long-standing leader in this space, whether it's with the Women Making Waves program, working with just diverse influencers over the last few years. And even this headline is from a group of people on our team and the RBFF team that brought a group of reporters to Puget Sound this last year to explore the benefits of fishing and boating. So of course have to highlight the amazing work in that space as well. And so yes, all of these brands are getting involved. That's great. But when we look at where things are at, even though there have been those efforts in recent years, the current outdoors participant base is still significantly less diverse than the overall US population. So when you look at this report, this is a report from the Outdoor Industry Association that was released in just August of this year. You can kind of tell that that blue bar graph is the total US population. The yellow bar is, outdoor recreation participants that we're seeing this year. There's still a pretty huge disconnect there with, almost 58% of white people representing the US population, but they represent as high as 72% of the outdoor participants. So that gap really translates across ethnicities too. And just seeing that lack and disconnect and gap between how high they are in the US population, but then how low they are in outdoor recreation participants. And this isn't anything new, but it's continuing to grow. And I think in the past, it's been an opportunity for us. That gap has been an opportunity to capitalize on them, but now it's turning into a little bit more of an urgent need. And this is really this Outdoor Association report is truly a call to the outdoor industry to say, hey, if this isn't addressed, the percentage of outdoor recreation participants could actually slip under 40% by 2060, if that number doesn't equalize a little bit. So this is really definitely more of an urgent call now to the outdoor industry. And this report goes on to say too that, you know, the lack of diversity, if not addressed, could actually lead to significant revenue loss for businesses in the outdoor market, and potentially also less support for conservation of public lands. So really saying like the future of the outdoor industry is at risk, and this is kind of an urgent call to action. So how the boating industry, you know, continue to get involved in this? There's a lot that you can do, obviously, and representation plays such a key part in that. But one smaller way to do this, and I know that this is something that Discover Boating has already started to do, but influencer content continues to perform and also resonate really well with audiences of color. It's a really good way to just on your social media feed to be targeted with that, but also just see it organically, to see people that look like you in the outdoors as a way to grab them and pull them into that space. So yes, it's great for, you know, building that representation, but it also just has a huge impact on purchase decisions. When we look at influencer content, it still continues to outperform a lot of other content. When consumers were asked what types of content most impacted their purchase decisions, 70% of them actually said this user-generated content. So, which is even higher than brand advertising content. So, if you're wondering, you know, how can I get started? How can I continue to do work in this space? Influencer content is a really strong idea. So our final takeaway here is that, you know, according to this research, this report, there's no longer an opportunity for marketers here, but there truly is a really urgent need for them to focus on diversity and inclusion in outdoor campaigns to allow for the greatest growth for the outdoor industry. So I know that that was a lot of information, but just wanted to provide just a couple takeaways. So just kind of a summary of what we've talked about from that first section in talking about the outdoor boom and where that's headed. We're seeing consumers really resonate with campaigns that relate to joy and connection with others. And so thinking about how you can incorporate joy and that connection into your marketing campaigns in your next cycle would be really beneficial, as well as how you can provide some of those community-based experiences centered around your products. Second section, we chatted about, you know, a possible upcoming economic recession and why it is the most beneficial to maintain or even increase marketing spend there, and then also using, you know, calm and reliable messaging. And then finally, in this last section, we chatted about just that urgent need to increase representation in the outdoor space so that the outdoors market can continue to grow. And we chatted about how working with diverse influencers can be a really great way and a good start in those efforts. So that is our summary of takeaways. I know Steph is going to join me back on, and we would love to hear just any questions that you all have, or if there's anything that stood out to you, even if there's anything that stood out to you that you would love to either hear more about or chat more about. I'd love to just open it up again.
Question for you, Saskia.
Awesome.
So as we think about the recession that you mentioned, are there any marketing tactics that you would recommend in that time? Like anything that you think would work well over another?
Can you say that one more time? I think it just cut out just a little bit before you said tactics.
Yeah, what marketing tactics do you think might work well in an upcoming recession?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing is like increasing ad spend. I think it's not, I really think, you know, that joy and connection type of messaging is like can still find a place even in an upcoming recession. It's just thinking about that messaging that you're using, thinking about that reliable and calm type of messaging. But there's still a lot. There's people look for like escapism too in recessions, and I think fishing and boating allow a lot of joy and just those moment of outdoor escapes. So I think those joy and connection messaging and just allowing those opportunities for people to come together will still be continually relevant even in an upcoming recession.
Great, thank you. I see we've got a hand raised by Courtney. Let me see, maybe you're having an unmute issue. Let's try this.
Okay, good. Phew. I
yeah.
just sent you, hi everybody, I just sent you an email to Stephanie saying, I don't know if you can see me. So the question I had was around the Merrill Hiking Club.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think a lot of us in the industry have tried to build out communities over time and probably just aren't patient enough for it. And so my question was, how long did it take Merrill to develop the hiking club community? And did they offer some type of discount or incentive for people to contribute to it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure how long it took them. I would have to go back and look at that. I know it has been a really good example though of one that was like part of their like sponsored by them, but they really wanted it to be female led. They were trying to focus more energy on focusing more of their products toward women. So they selected a much smaller audience and had it led by like female trailblazers to get women feeling more comfortable and like build more of a female community. So I think sometimes like making a smaller, more targeted community can be honestly easier than just putting it out there like directed at everyone. And I think
that's good feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I know it can take a little bit of time to grow, but I think when people find out about it, it really resonates. And that's something that we've seen across the board too, in terms of like retention is just having people to go with, having a friend that is going to keep you going. Like that's so key to retention too. So can take a little bit of time to build up, but yeah, that's a great question.
Previous question, I was wondering if there is any trend on the role of the owners groups and forums, and if there's been an increase in participation, or is it more challenging for brands to get their buyers to participate in the owners groups? And just wondering if there's any insight on that.
In terms of, so when you say owners groups, you mean just those community-based groups?
Right, like for instance, somebody who owns a Boston whaler, and if there's a forum and a group for Boston whaler owners.
Yeah, I think I definitely would. I think like we've seen a lot of it like sparked online too, like just social media and people starting that online too as a way to like connect with people. So yes, there is, like an event once a month, but then just finding ways to continue to talk with them and like continue to keep that group going. I think social media groups have been a really good tactic, just in a way, like whether it's an Instagram page or just Facebook groups, it seems like there are so many of them out there to kind of continue that. I don't know if that answers your question. Feel free to keep asking if that doesn't.
I think you're saying that social media is a better way to connect with your audience rather than, say, like an independent group or forum.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like both of them, honestly, like those in-person ways. I think that can't be replaced in terms of finding those community-based experiences. But in terms of like keeping people then connected to the community after those experiences, social media has been a really good way to do that.
Okay, yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Hi, it's Stephanie. I wanted to ask, as it relates to conservation, what are you guys seeing in that space in terms of brands that are aligned with conservation programs, initiatives, messaging versus brands that aren't? In the boating space, I think it's probably a little bit tricky, right? Because people may just assume that boats are putting all this bad stuff in the water. So is it to our benefit to give back and align with programs that are keeping our waters clean and conserving our resources?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think when we look at just general consumer sentiment across the board, that's another trend that's come out post-pandemic, is that people care more about sustainability. People care more about taking sustainable vacations. They care more about buying sustainable products. That's another just big trend across the board, that I think is really relevant, and like another way that pandemic has just changed people's attitudes and behaviors. I think conservation is still a big message, and I think it has a place for it, in some of this joy and connection. I think part of joy and connection can also be, that it connected to idea of preserving the outdoors, so that the people after us can have that same joy and connection. So I think it still has a really relevant place, in terms of like inviting people into that, in a community-based way.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining. And Saskia, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. It was fantastic. We will send out the recording of the webinar so you guys can watch it and share with your teams. And like I mentioned, please keep an eye out for future webinars. We're hoping to have a handful more next year and look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you so much to everyone that joined. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.